This is a talk about how WikiLeaks disrupted the media industry, similar to how companies like Uber disrupted the taxi industry or Amazon disrupted the book industry. Julian Assange grew up with the internet. By the time he was 17, he had a PC and a modem, and he was able to access bulletin boards in Melbourne and around the world. WikiLeaks published their first leaks in early 2007. Originally it was set up to be a wiki like Wikipedia, and anybody could create an account and start helping, but Assange got very frustrated at the lack of work that people were doing to analyze documents and so forth, and by 2010 it wasn't a wiki anymore. The early media interest was quite strong. There was a lot of questions asked about who's behind WikiLeaks. Could this be the CIA or a Russian or Chinese front? In fact, China was the first country to block WikiLeaks almost as soon as it appeared. Before 2010, Julian Assange had already won an Amnesty International award for his work in Kenya, exposing the corruption of President Moi and helping to change the course of the election there. WikiLeaks had published a lot of leaks from the US and UK military, including the Guantanamo Bay, presumably from sources who were not happy about what was being done over there. They also published a lot of random stuff like the Bermuda Housing Corporation scandal, and there was a lot of leaks related to banks. In Britain, the Northern Rock Bank, people started withdrawing their money and the executives insisted that everything was okay, but Julian Assange, WikiLeaks, published internal documents showing that everything was not okay. Barclays Bank tried to gag WikiLeaks and fail, and then a Swiss banking whistleblower, Rudolf Elmer, came forward with a couple of CDs full of data. The Swiss bank came down hard on WikiLeaks and they forced wikileaks.org offline, but WikiLeaks pointed people to other mirror sites around the world, such as wikileaks.nl, wikileaks.ru. It soon became clear to everybody that the legal structure and the technical structure of WikiLeaks made them very hard to bring down. If WikiLeaks posted a document online, it was very hard to get it taken down. In 2010, a young army private in Baghdad, Chelsea Manning, previously Bradley Manning, burned a whole load of data onto 2 DVDs and took them home on leave to the United States. She contacted the Washington Post and got an answer machine. She contacted the New York Times and spoke to someone who didn't sound very interested and said somebody would call back, but nobody did call back. There was a big snowstorm outside, so she went to wikileaks.org and clicked on the submit button. The important thing about the WikiLeaks Dropbox is that it guaranteed anonymity to both sides. The only reason Manning got sent to jail is because she spoke to another hacker called Adrian Lamo. Technically, there's 2 important points here. One is the size of the leak, and the other is the use of the Dropbox. These were not things that the media organization had done before. At this time, as the Manning leaks were published, the WikiLeaks group was under a lot of pressure. Some internal staff and supporters tried to overthrow Julian Assange and then left the organization, taking a bunch of leaked data with them, which they later destroyed. From then onwards, whenever the media wanted some nasty comments about Julian Assange, they often were sourced from anonymous former WikiLeaks insiders, such as these. This is an example of a contract that WikiLeaks drew up with their media partners. In this case, Alan Rusbridger from The Guardian has promised not to publish anything from the Cablegate archive without permission, not to share the Cablegate archive with any third party, and to keep the archive on an air-gapped computer at all times. He broke all these promises almost immediately. The Guardian shared the Cablegate archive with the New York Times while Julian Assange was trying to organize a deal with the Washington Post, for example. It's worth noting that the media organizations were under a lot of financial pressure at this time. They were struggling to understand how to adapt to the internet. and they were losing millions of dollars a year. After the cables, the Manning leaks had been published, The Guardian rushed out a book to make a bit more money, and the book revealed the password that Julian Assange had given them to what they said was a temporary website, but it was not a temporary website. That was a location on the internet where the archive could be found. It wasn't long before the former WikiLeaks insiders started telling the German media where the file could be found. The gossip spread on the internet, and soon people like Nigel Parry were able to locate the data and open it up with the password provided by the Guardian book. So WikiLeaks had a big problem. What should they do? They asked their supporters if they should release all of the unredacted US cables, and the thinking was that if you're a spy in Russia for the CIA, or if you're an informer in Afghanistan, you would want to know that your name is one of those cables before people come and try and kill you. So people voted yes, and the WikiLeaks published all the unredacted cables on their search engine. In response, the media, such as the BBC here, came forward with stories saying Julian Assange has put lives at risk by sharing unredacted files. Journalists like Ian Overton, who had worked with Julian Assange on the Iraq War logs, said this was complete nonsense. In fact, Julian Assange was more concerned with redacting names than his Guardian friends, who said that he was the one who would get into trouble, not them, because WikiLeaks was publishing these releases, and they were only reporting on them. But in fact, the WikiLeaks site was often forced down by attacks while these stories were being released in the newspaper, so often the media published first. Nevertheless, it was indeed Julian Assange who got in trouble, not them. In the middle of all this, of course, we had the Swedish sex scandal. I could say a lot, but I'll just keep it short here. Assange stayed in Sweden for a few weeks and gave a statement to police and was told that he could leave the country. The case was then closed and then reopened by another prosecutor in another Swedish town. It was only ever a preliminary investigation which dragged on for 9 years, and there never were any charges. So why didn't Sweden just go to England and question Assange in 2010? The answer is that the British government told them not to. Current Labour leader Keir Starmer was the head of the Crown Prosecution Service, and his staff sent emails to Swedish prosecutors telling them not to come to London and not to close their case. We only know this because of a Freedom of Information requests that were posted by Italian journalist Stefania Marizzi in the UK, USA, Australia and Sweden. The Swedish prosecutors still had the emails which they gave to Stefania Marizzi, but the British prosecutors had deleted all their emails after Keir Starmer left. So this story was published in The Guardian, but never mentioned again, and the rest of the media just ignored it. To be fair to the press, they were under a lot of pressure with the government issuing D notices, threatening editors not to publish things. The social media companies were also getting subpoenaed by the US Department of Justice. Julian Assange was far more popular with the public than he was with media insiders. The media began imitating some of the key initiatives of WikiLeaks, including the Dropbox. This is an example of the Wall Street Journal Dropbox called Safe House. But when you click the button, it had a bunch of terms and conditions that you had to agree to. One of them saying we don't guarantee anything, including your safety, and you should use your own privacy software such as the Tor browser. But people used the Tor browser and tried to send information, and it didn't work. Another example of media imitation is that they began to publish stories based on huge leaks such as the Panama Papers, which was 2,660 gigabytes compared to 1.7 gigabytes for the whole Cablegate archive. The difference is that the media only released small portions of these big leaks and cherry-picked the data that they wanted to release. For example, the Panama Papers revealed a lot about Vladimir Putin using tax havens, but not so much about US billionaires using tax havens. Here's a photo of the editors at The Guardian in London being forced to destroy their own hard drives while the UK intelligence services watched after they published the information from Edward Snowden. It's worth noting that Snowden remained in Hong Kong until WikiLeaks came to help him escape, while The Guardian were getting awards for their journalism. The media also just published outright lies quite often, just complete smears and lies about Julian Assange in particular. This is an example of a story where they said that Donald Trump's former campaign manager, who was accused of lying to, or found guilty of lying to the Mueller Russiagate inquiry, trying to basically say Assange had met that guy 3 times, so he's also linked to Russia. But in fact, Assange never met Manafort. He did not go to the embassy. He was not in the visitor logs, and his passport showed he wasn't even in Britain at the time. Nevertheless, this story, now 5 years old, is still online. Another case of the silence in the media. We saw a team of reputable journalists publish a story in Yahoo News showing that Donald Trump's CIA had plotted to assassinate Julian Assange, or kidnap or poison him, with help from the UK intelligence agencies. The rest of the media just ignored this story. Another ignored media story was this case of Siggy Thordarson, who worked with WikiLeaks for a while, then stole $50,000 off them, then went to the FBI to become an informant, was then convicted of 11 counts of child sex fraud and multiple cases of fraud, and when he went to jail he recanted all his evidence against Julian Assange, but there was only one paper that reported that, which was a small paper in the Netherlands, I think, called Stunden. As a result of all this, of course, public trust in the media has reached historic lows. This is a Gallup poll from 2022 showing that 38% of people in the USA had no trust at all in the media, and another 28% had not very much trust. On the bright side, the editors of those former newspapers, The Guardian, The New York Times, etc., have called for the government Britain and USA to immediately release Julian Assange and not extradite him to the USA. So there is some hope for journalism, but we still await his release. In conclusion, we can see that WikiLeaks did disrupt the media industry, which was and remains very financially distressed. The difference in the business model is that WikiLeaks is funded by readers, so it's a bottom-up model, whereas media organizations are controlled by states and billionaires and boardrooms, so it's a top-down model. We can say also that the reason WikiLeaks has not had a more enduring impact, aside from Julian Assange being sent to jail, is that the government and the media work together to block their success. This is just a quick example of the media hostility that Julian Assange faced. These are tweets from ABC journalists in Australia showing, one saying that Ecuador deserved a big gold star after they let the British police drag Julian Assange out of the embassy, and his colleagues all jumping in to say he's not even a journalist. Well, it's hard to agree with that when he's won so many top awards, including the Walkley Award for the most outstanding contribution to journalism. That's the top award you can get in Australia. Meanwhile, on Twitter, we now have Elon Musk saying that Twitter is going to be the main source of news for people. That's fine, except where do they get their content? They need either media organizations or else independent media groups like WikiLeaks to provide the information. So we'll wait and see where that goes. So thank you.